Welcome back, and in this lesson we're going to be applying what we learned in the previous lesson where we saw how we can change our arrays. So let's start out with a very basic array with 4 items in it. So we've got cat, dog, rabbit, and bird. So it's in that order, and when we refresh the page we get an output of cat, dog, rabbit, and bird. And what I want you to do is to open up your editor, take this simple array, and try to get this output. So we've got horse, fish, 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 fish. So there's 7 fish in there, rabbit, dog, and sheep. So this is what the result is that I want. Take what you learned in the previous lesson, and there probably are a number of ways to accomplish this. So try to create the shortest possible path to get your array to look like this in the end. So when you console log it out, get it to look with these values. So pause the video, open up your editor, or open up your browser, because you could just as easily place this within your browser and do your modifications of the array content and see if you can get it to look like this. So I hope you had the opportunity to try this out. And now I'm going to show you the solution. So first of all, what we wanted to do is to make our array a little bit longer. And we saw that down here at the end, our array has horse here. So let's add horse in. So now when we refresh our array, it looks like this, and we've got all of those undefineds. And in the previous lesson, we saw how we can actually take care of all those undefineds by using fill. So let's use fill. And within fill, we see that we've got fish repeated a whole bunch of times. So we can set that fill in at this point. We can start it at 3. So we're going to start it after bird. Or actually, we need to start, we don't have bird included in there, so let's start it at 3. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, so it's going to overwrite bird. So that's the starting point. And we saw that in the last lesson as well, that whatever index you specify, it actually overwrites that one, and it goes all the way to 10, so stopping just before it hits horse. So let's try this out now and refresh it. So now we've got cat, dog, rabbit, bunch of fish, and horse. And we see that it actually starts in the reverse order. So let's actually now, let's reverse the order of it. So this one is reverse. So it's the method that we're going to use, built-in method. And now let's refresh it. And so now it's starting to look a lot more like what we have over here, except cat is sheep and everything else looks the same. We've got the 7 fish in there. So there's a number of things that we could do here, and of course you could do the new holder. You could specify that last item and you could just replace it with sheep. But what I wanted to do is I want to just go through some of the methods that we used last time. So we'll pop, basically remove out that cat and add in our new one by using new holder again, and this time we're going to push that value in. And as I said, there's probably several ways that you could do this and you could accomplish the same thing. And this one over here, you could have done it a little bit shorter by just specifying that last item needs to change to sheep. So you could have done that as well, and that would be correct as well. And at that point, you'd get that same output. So let's refresh it and make sure that we did get that same output within our array. And everything looks correct. So I can even copy that and paste that in there, and we can do a quick eyeball comparison, and we see that in fact they are the same. The values are all the same, and we did accomplish our goal. So have some fun with it and try it out for yourself and see all the different methods that you can apply in order to accomplish this output, starting with these 4 items in the array. So next lesson, we're going to look at some more methods that are available for arrays, providing even more power for our arrays. So that's coming up. Welcome back, and in this lesson, we're going to be looking at access methods within arrays. So there's a whole bunch of functionality within arrays. We saw some of the default methods that were already available within arrays in the previous lesson. So now we want to take this one step further, and we've got our array set up here. We've got a bunch of items in the array, and in this one, we're going to return some information or some representation of the array. So instead of actually modifying the array, we need some information out of the array. So we can find out position of the index by using a built-in method called indexOf. So new holder, and this is my array name, and next index of. So index of will return back if there's a value of cat. So let's try this out and refresh it. And now if I do position index to get that value, we see that cat is at 0. We can also we can pick up values, so we can do index of, and we can see that we've got bird. So bird is at index number 3, and so on. And this could be really useful actually for our previous exercise where we were guessing the index value of the particular item in the array. So what actually happens if I say something that I'm looking for and it doesn't actually exist in our array? So if I go for horse, and in this particular array, I don't have a horse in it, we get a return value of -1. So this can actually also be really useful because we can use this in order to detect if a value is in the array. So what I want you to do is pause the video and create a solution that's going to actually prompt the user for a response, and then it's going to look for and check to see if that responded value in the prompt is within our array, and then reply back to the user whether that item exists in the array or not. So I know that's quite a few things there within this challenge. So let's pause the video, and I'm going to show you the solution coming up. So welcome back. I hope you had an opportunity to try that out. So we know that we need a prompt. So first one is going to be, so maybe we can just do, I'll just do Q for question. And this time we're doing prompt. And what did you want to look for? So we're going to look for something within this array, and then we're going to return back and we're going to check to see if it's actually in the array. And we know we need to set up a variable for a message, and we also need our console log where we can output that message so that it's readable within the console. So next, let's set message, and this is where we can do a condition value. So we've got a number of options here, and I'm going to actually copy this one. I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to use, we'll just use P. So we're going to check to see if the query that they had entered into the prompt is available in there, and if it's not, we're going to return a -1, and if it is, then we know that we're going to have a value that's over, not -1, so 0 or higher. So let's do our ternary operator here. So we know that if P is greater than -1, then what we're going to do is we're going to return back found. Otherwise, we're going to go not there in the message. So let's try this out. Open that up, and let's do horse and not there. So let's try this again. This time let's do cat. We see that it's found. So we see that this index of can be used in a number of ways, and this was a simplified format to quickly search and check if the item exists within the array. So there's actually another method that's available built in within JavaScript arrays where we can actually check to see if it's included, and this is the includes method. So much like what we did with the index here, where we check to see if it exists, we can get a Boolean response. So let's do new holder, And this time we're going to use includes. So this is a built-in method within JavaScript, and we need to specify what we want to include. So let's try dog this time, and we see that we get a true value. So if we do dog with 2 G's, we're going to get false because that's actually not included within the array. So that's another way to produce the same results using another method. And there are quite a lot of methods that are available for arrays within JavaScript. So earlier we had saw slice or splice, and we've got another one that we want to show you before we finish up this lesson, and this one is called splice. So this actually gives us the ability to slice a part of the array and return that information back. So let's grab that array and let's do a slice on it. And for slice, basically it returns a part of the array. So different than splice, because splice allowed us to actually modify the array. This is a method that only allows us to pull information from the array. So we need to specify our starting point, our ending index value, and we can see that we can return back dog and rabbit, which is starting from index 1 and ending at before it hits index 3. So just returning back these 2 items. So we don't have to specify how many, but we've got a starting and a completing point in order to complete our slice. So this lesson, I wanted to finish off by giving you some homework, and this is to go over to the Mozilla Developer Network and take a look and see all the different things that you can do with arrays. Because literally this will take me a whole bunch of lessons to kind of work through all of these. I've worked through some of the more common ones. I've showed you how they work. So now it's up to you to go over to the website and do some research on your own. Find out a little bit more about what's available in arrays and what more you can do with arrays past what we've already shown within this lesson and the previous lessons. So in the next lesson, we're going to be doing another exercise where we're going to be removing a specific element from the array. So whatever element that we're going to be asking, and we're going to remove that specific element out of the array. So I'm going to show you how to do that coming up. Welcome back, and in this lesson we're going to be doing a challenge. So this challenge is going to be using the prompt again. It's going to be using arrays. So we're going to start out with a basic array, and we're going to ask the user to see if they want to remove a particular value from the array. So this time let's set up our array, and we're going to do this array really simple. We're going to just use a bunch of numbers so that way we can create a whole bunch of values in there and do this really easily. So actually I shouldn't repeat those values. So I think that's pretty good. And just to make it more interesting, we'll sort that array. And then console log out array. I'll show you what we have now. So now we have a nicely sorted array. And I know I just had to throw in that sort. It's actually not necessary within this exercise, but I just didn't get a chance earlier to show you how it sorts numbers. So we're able to sort it in a number of ways. And also let's add in a few strings as well, so you can get a better idea of how things sort for arrays. So we see that it sorts numbers first. So incrementing from 1 all the way to 77, then starts with the characters. So C is before D and so on. So that's how it does the sort. So going back to the task at hand, and this is where we want to have another prompt. So I'm going to start with Q, and we're going to do prompt. And the question this time, what do you want to remove? And so we're asking the user what they want to remove. And next, we need to find out the value of the index. So let's, we'll call it finder. And this one, we're going to take array, and we're going to get the value index of. And this is where we're sending that response back from the prompt. So we're going to take a look and we're going to see if index exists, and if it actually exists, then we know that we can splice and we can remove out that item out of the array. If it doesn't exist, then we're not able to remove that out. So we've got that value of finder there. And next, let's do another one. We'll call it REM, remover. So that was finder. This one's the actual remover. So we get that array, we're specifying it, we're splicing that particular value, and we're splicing finder, and we're returning, we're only splicing out 1. So whatever the value of the finder is, the index, we're going to splice that out and we're going to remove it. And then lastly, let's console log out our array. And let's refresh it. So what do you want to remove out from the array? Let's remove out cat. And we see that now when we remove that out, then we've got that item, it's removed out of the array. So we've got the array being listed out again. So again, this time, let's try something that's not in the array. And this is gonna remove out dog, because what's happening here is that, let me show you. So the value of finder is -1. So where we don't have a value of finder, and what it's doing here is it's just returning a value of -1. So it's starting here and it's doing a -1, and that's why it's taking dog out of the equation, because it doesn't have the last item. And we see here that the last item is also indicative of what we're specifying here. So we need to add in something else as well. And this is going to get a lot easier once we introduce conditional statements, which is coming up in the upcoming lessons. But for now, let's use what we've already learned, and that's the ternary operator. So let's take a look and let's assign a new value. So maybe we'll just call this one V. And we're going to take a look and we're going to see if finder is greater than -1, then we're going to use whatever the value of finder is. And if it's not, so we'll just use the value of finder here. And if it's not, then we need to do something else here. And in this case, we're not able to actually splice anything out. So maybe let's do something like 11 or something like that and see if that works. Or we have to do the length of the array. So let's try that one. So array and length. So let's go back out and refresh it. So now we'll enter in something that doesn't exist in there, and it's still taking out that last item. So this is going to be a difficult part because we're automatically always removing that last one. So this isn't working, and I know we're limited to this ternary operator, so there is actually a solution. So instead of creating and setting that value of finder and then doing it within remover, let's just get that value, because we're actually returning a value from that method. So we're able to do that, and we're actually able to output something from V. So now we can also, over here, we can set this to be, let's set this to be false. And now whenever we run this, so let's console log out the value of V and refresh the page. So now let's enter something that doesn't exist in the array, and we get returned back false. And now let's enter something that does exist in the array, and we see we get that item returned, and it actually removes it from the array. So that's the solution, and I know this was a little bit of a workaround. This one did get a little bit more complex, but we do see how we can use multiple statements and start combining them in order to apply even more logic into our application process. So the next lesson, we're going to look at multi-dimensional arrays. And I know that sounds really cool, and I guarantee you it is. So that's coming up in the next lesson, and it's going to actually extend what we can do with arrays, and coming up in the next lesson. Welcome back, and in this lesson, we're going to look at multi-dimensional arrays. So they're also known as nested arrays, but multi-dimensional does sound a whole lot better. So basically, what a multi-dimensional array does is essentially allows you to contain multiple values within an array and have multiple arrays within that array as well. So let's set up our array, and for this one, let's start out with something familiar where we set up our typical array, and then we're going to actually turn this one into a multi-dimensional array. So we've got our basic array here all ready to go. Go back out here, refresh it, we can see our array. So let's turn it into a multi-dimensional array. And all we have to do is to wrap around that. So now when I refresh it, and if I do array, I see that returned response is actually an array within an array. So if I wanted to get access to the contents of the first array, or the first item in the array, so just as if I was returning back any one of these, the values in just a single dimensional array, we would use the index value. So this one has an index to retrieve back that first array, and then it retrieves that back. So in order to get cat, dog, or fish, I need to specify the next index value that we want to look for. So let's pull back fish, and we can see that this way we can return the value of fish. So essentially all this is just multiple arrays, one inside of the other, so nested within each other. So maybe this one can be a numeric one, just having a bunch of numbers. And we can go back out, we'll refresh the page, we'll see what array looks like now within the console. And we can see that we're returning back all the contents of array, and we see that we've got two arrays within that array, and we can see that each one of them pretty much functions as an array on its own. And basically you can type in other different data types as well, and that doesn't actually affect anything that's happening within the multi-dimensional array. So we have the ability to have these multi-dimensional pieces to the array, and we can still call back any part of the array. So if we want to get back 50, we know that the index is 3, and we can call those back. But if we wanted to get deeper into those existing arrays, then we have to specify additional index values in order to be able to pull back those values. So if we want to pull back dog, we need to specify first the index in the main array where it's located, which is at index 0. And then next, we need to look at that array that's contained within there. And this one has 3 items in there, and we can pull back the value of dog. So when we press ARR, bracket 0, bracket 1, that's how we can retrieve back the value of dog. And initially, it does take some more time to start working and to be able to visualize these multi-dimensional arrays. But once you do start working with them, there's quite a lot of power behind there, because you have the ability to store multiple levels of information all contained within the array and all contained within that one variable. And this is only one that we need to remember in order to access all this wonderful information. So what I want you to do now as an exercise is to create your own multi-dimensional array and set it up as an array, and then add in a list of people. So maybe create a collection of friends, list out all of your friends, and then have another value within that array corresponding to when you first met them. So the order that, or maybe the last time you saw them. So the last one that you saw might be a 1, and then 2, 3, and so on. So try that out, and I'll show you how to do that solution. So welcome back, and in this lesson I'm going to show you how to create that challenge. So initially we said to create an array that has a bunch of friends in it. So let's do that. And then within that array, so this is a multi-dimensional array, so we're just going to do those 2 square brackets right off the bat. So let's put in some names in there. So let's do some typical names. And so we've got 3 names in there. And then we want the next array to correspond with when we first met them. So if we met Larry first, Mike second, and then John third. So let's do it within that order. So we've just got some numbers that are corresponding there. And now if we want to retrieve back information for Mike, we can set a variable of Q, or maybe we can do a prompt here as well. And the question will be which friend. So we'll just get a numeric value. So Mike, John, and Larry will get a response back there, and we'll console log out the value of the response from the prompt so we can return back the contents of our friends array, and both of these are going to be the same value. So we're going to look for a value of Q, and this one also is going to be a value of Q. So let's open up our browser and try this out. So which friend do we want to look at? And we're going to find out the order that we're able to see them as well. And actually, before I finish this up, there is an error here because we need to specify that this is the first array, and then that second array is actually, so the first one is where we're retrieving back our friends, and then next we're going to say when you met them order. And this time we need to specify the second array, because we've got the first array, the second array, so we do need to specify, and then the Q is just specifying what index we want in that multidimensional array. And I just saw an error in there, so let's add that comma in there, because we do need to comma separate out those arrays. So let's try this out. So which friend do we want to take a look at? We'll look at friend number 1, and John, when you met them, order number 3. So we can try that again, and this might actually be better if they were actually dates or years or something like that. So let's do 1980, 1990, and let's do this one at 2016. So when you met them, and we'll do year when you met. So get rid of that order. And we can also start with you met John in, so do it like that. So this is going to give us some more details about content within our arrays. So let's go back out and refresh it. So let's see which friend we want to take a look at. So you met Mike in 1980, you met John in 1990, and you met Larry in 2016. So this is how you can work and use multi-dimensional arrays to retrieve and hold multiple values, all contained within one variable. So in the next lesson, I'm going to quickly show you how you can loop through the values of the array so that we don't have to actually go and do one by one. And I'll show you how to do that, and there's a really simple trick to looping through the values of an array. So that's coming up in the next lesson. Welcome back, and in this lesson I want to show you how you can loop through the values of an array. So we saw that we created multiple arrays here. So what I wanted to do, actually get rid of the multi-dimensions here, because this will just simplify this and make it a little bit easier. So if I wanted to see all the values that are contained within the array, So we can get rid of this stuff here now. And what I want to do is I actually want to log out the values that are contained within ARR. So how do we do that? And there's a really easy way when it comes to arrays where we can use a loop. And we are going to look at loops coming up in the latter lessons of this course as well in more detail. But for now, let's just stick to what we can do within arrays. So we can set up and we can do a for loop. So for loop is initialized with 4, and then we need to set the parameters that it's going to be looping. So we just set a variable. So we can just call that x, and then in, and then we specify the array. So basically what's going to happen here with this just simple line of code, it's actually going to give us the ability to loop through the values of the array. So let me also console log out the value of x. And this is just a really neat simple loop function that's pre-built, and you can use it within your arrays. So let's try out and see what happens now. So we see that we actually do loop through every single item in the array. We start out with index 0, cat, index 1, dog, index 2, fish, and then index 3 is value of 4, and so on. So I know these numbers kind of got a little bit jumbled because just remember that that first one, line number 11 from the code, is outputting the index. So this is the index value. And then next is the item value. So that's what that's outputting. So it's just a quick way to loop through all of the content of your array. So what I want you to do is to try that out on your own array as well. So take one of the arrays from the earlier lessons, paste it into your editor, and then loop through it. So setting a variable, and this variable can be anything that you want. We're just using x at the moment. Just make sure that when you want to retrieve those values that you're updating the value of x. And then this value, so we need to do var, so we specify it's a variable x in array. So in is needs to be included within this loop. And then next, we just need to specify which array we want it to loop through. And we've got our array called ARR. So go ahead, try it out for yourself. In the next lesson, we're going to be jumping into objects. Welcome back, and in this lesson, we're going to be looking at objects. And we saw earlier that an array is actually an object, but it was a special type of object. And we also saw earlier that there's 5 primitive data types in JavaScript, and everything else is an object. So this is all about objects. And objects also give us, much like arrays, the ability to hold multiple different pieces of data within one variable. So over here, we still have our array, and I've left this in here just to give you a comparison to what the difference between an array and object is. So when we set up an object, we set up within our familiar format where we do var, so variable object, because we've, again, using that same variable structure, and then on the right hand side is where we've got our different data type. So we know that JavaScript uses objects, and almost everything in JavaScript is an object. So what exactly is an object? And if you look around in the real world outside of the computer, we see that we've got a number of items that are sitting around, and these are all objects. They've got a bunch of properties. So if we take, for instance, a car, we know that a car has multiple properties, and objects are defined with these curly brackets. So let's list out some of the properties that we know about a car. So we know that a car will have a color, and we can specify the color. So maybe, for instance, this one is red. It would also have a make. So maybe this one is a Ford. We also have wheels. So maybe it's got 6 wheels. I'm not sure what type of car this is that's got 6 wheels. But let's say, for instance, 6 wheels. And we can see that we've got a number of associations to this car. So we've got a color, a make, wheels, and maybe better than wheels is doors. So I think that's more of a common one. So we can have 6 doors or 5 doors, or maybe 5 doors makes more sense. And then let's add one more value to it. So we know we've got a make, and we've got also a model for most cars. So maybe this is a Mustang because it's a Ford, and Fords have Mustangs. So it's a red Mustang with 5 doors, and these are the properties that are available in this particular object. So let's log out this object and see what it looks like within the console. So go back out here, refresh it, and we see that we've got all of these values now are associated to the object variable, the OBJ variable. And of course, this variable you can call whatever you want as long as it just makes sense within the context of the content that you're outputting. So we see that the structure for objects is very similar to what we found within arrays, but instead of having indexes within the items, we have what's called as paired values. So we have a name of the value, and then we have the value of it. So a name separated by a colon, and then each one of the properties is then separated out by a comma. So much like what we did within the arrays, but it gives us more flexibility and actually makes our content more humanly readable, whereas with the arrays we had to rely on the indices. This time we've got actual words for the name that we can refer to and pull back those values. So a whole lot more readable and easier to work with. So this is one way to define objects, and just like arrays, there's an alternative to define objects, which you might see as well, but it's not as common, and really the literal way to define arrays, to define objects, is the best way to go. But just in case you do encounter the constructor, the object constructor method, I'll show you how to do that as well. So we'll just call this one object1, obj1, and this time, just like the arrays, we have to declare we're creating a new object. So this is how we specify that new object, and now we can console log out that object. And I know we don't have any contents in there yet, so we can console log that out, and that's perfectly valid. But really, the big difference here is that formatting it this way, so you can still add items into that object. So much like what we've added in here, we can construct and we can add additional values in here. So obj1, and let's do the same thing that we did up there. So do color, and we'll equal it to red, and then so on and so on. So we can add all of those values in a similar format. So obj1, and next let's do make and Ford, just so that we have some consistency. Let's refresh, and we can see that we can build out that object within that same format. But using it this way within that constructor method, it doesn't perform as well in browsers. It's a lot more difficult to read, and it's just there's more typing than the literal method. So the literal method is the way to go, and it's the most commonly used format for setting up objects in JavaScript. So in the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to retrieve data. So what I want you to do before we start the next lesson, open up your editor, create an object, take a look around the room that you're in, and actually do a description of one of the items that you see within the room, and create an object out of that and output that information into the console. So in the next lesson, I'll show you how you can retrieve that information, and we can retrieve specific pieces, specific values that are contained within our object. I'll show you how to do that coming up. Welcome back, and previously we saw how we can make objects, how we could define objects, and we saw that there was really 2 ways to do that. So either way that you do that, you're going to end up with an object, and you're going to be able to have the same use out of that object. So it's just a matter of how you prefer to define that object and what method works best for you. So I'm going to comment out that constructor method, and we're going to focus on the literal method. So we've created an object here, and we see that we are able to output that information into the console by doing console log object. But what if we actually want to retrieve a specific piece of information? And with objects, it's going to be really easy. So let me go back out here and refresh it, and we see that we've got our object here. So I can do object, and I see that I've got my names here. So I've got color, I've got make, I've got doors, and this is all I have to do. I can use the dot notation and specify the object name, so the original main container for the object, obj, and then I can also specify one of the values that's in there because we've got these named values. So all I have to do obj doors, and it just makes a whole lot more sense. So I can even change this to be even more, something that makes even more sense semantically, where I've got a car, and I've got my car, and I've got my make. So I know that my car is a Ford. I've got my model. I can see it's a Mustang. And I've got some additional information. So I know it's got 5 doors and so on. So there's also another way to retrieve information. And this way has a few advantages. So although it's not as easy to write out as this dot notation, you can do bracket, and we can quote the property, the name of the property that we want to retrieve. So we can retrieve it within this format as well. So you're probably wondering, well, why would we go with this one when we can use this one? And that's a really good question. And the answer to that is that the dot notation, although it's easier to write and easier to read, it lacks some of the capabilities that the bracket notation has. And one of the things the bracket notation can do is it can dynamically change the property of the values. So we can do something. I'm going to go back out into my editor, and I'm going to say that maybe I want prop, and the property is color. So if I want to retrieve back the value of car color, and maybe we're setting this dynamically, so we're picking it out, we could do it from a prompt as well. So we're setting this dynamically. I can't do something like this. That's not going to work. So if I refresh it, we get undefined, because this is where we actually have to use that bracket notation, and that value, because this could be potentially a dynamic value as well. We see that this is our way to actually retrieve back that particular property. So making this more dynamic, I can change this to doors. I can refresh the page, and I can see that in this format we can change prop, and we can retrieve back the different values dynamically. So basically it gives us more flexibility to retrieve back information as needed. And that's the reason for going with the bracket notation over the dot notation. So what I want you to do now is to open up your editor, create a similar object that what I have here describing a car, and then we're going to ask the user what information using a prompt, what they want to see, and then we're going to retrieve that information and put that back into the console. So a lot of the work is done other than the prompt, so you can pause the video and you can pretty much work with what we've got displayed here and update it to really simply ask that prompt and retrieve back that information, sending it back into the console. So I'll give you a few minutes, open up your editor, try it out, and I'll provide that solution. So we saw earlier that we've got a prompt. So the prompt gives us the ability to essentially ask a question. So what did you want to know about the car? And of course, we're expecting that the user is going to either enter color, make, doors, or model. So we're going to keep it at that. And it's as simple as this. We just had to format this in a question and pass that dynamic value into prompt, P-R-O-P, prop, and then we could output it into the console. So let's try it out. So what do we want to know? Let's check the color. We see that it comes back red. What do you want to know about the car? Doors. See that comes back 5. So I know that this should have been a fairly easy challenge. So that was incorrect. So that was actually model I was looking for. Comes back Mustang. So this is where you can begin to see that using objects is really useful because the names here just make sense. And then retrieving it, we can also create a dynamic way to retrieve that information. So now we've seen how we can retrieve information, how we can create objects. So in the next lesson, I'm going to show you how you can update some information within that object. So that's coming up. Welcome back. In the previous lesson, we saw how we can retrieve information from the object. And this time, let's update some information in the object. And we actually had a clue earlier on when we looked at this constructor method, because we saw that we could, just like we were setting variable values and we were setting array values, we can set values for the object. So we can do the same thing that we've got over there. I'm going to get rid of some of this excess here, and I'm going to just simply output car and update this to be car. So if we want to change our Mustang color from red to blue, and we can go and we can refresh it, and we can see that now that color is blue. So it's as easy as that. Specify what you want to change, and you're able to make that change directly within your object. So it's as easy as that to make updates to our values. And of course, we can also do this in the console here. So we can update the value. And of course, we need to do that assignment operator. So if we want to assign it and make it black, we see the response back is whatever the new assignment value is. And now if I go car, I can see that the color has changed. So this is the same thing if we do the bracket notation. So if we do color, and I know I keep changing this color, so it's a lot easier to change it within the object than it would actually physically be able to paint it. But that's besides the point. So let's change it to yellow and refresh it, and we can see that now our car color is yellow. We refresh the object, and we can see now the color is yellow. So it's as easy as that to make changes. And also, if I want to delete out a value from my object, so let's say I don't want to use color anymore, I can use the keyword delete, and then I can specify car color, and we can see that it comes back true because it actually existed within the object, and now when I list out the object, it's gone. So we don't see it anymore within our object. So we can delete out that those items, and then to add it back in, all we have to do is car.color. So the same way that we were creating it, and let's bring it back to our red Mustang. So now when I output car, we can see that the color is back in there and it's red now. So you can see how easy it is to update the content contained within the object and make use of it within your JavaScript. And lastly, I kind of want to go back to what we've been doing earlier where we look at type of. So what do you think type of car is going to be? We saw that arrays came back as objects. So what do you think this one's going to come back as? And if you said object, you're correct, because objects are objects in JavaScript. So what I want you to do now is take what you've learned in this lesson and try it out for yourself. Work with creating some objects. Again, looking around what you see in the real world, create an object around it, and then update that object with some additional values with new lines of code and new syntax. So making some updates to your original object as you make some more observations and see what other properties those objects have. Welcome back, and just as we saw within arrays, we can loop through the values that are contained within an object. So the same format where we use the for method, and then within the curly brackets, this is where we execute our code. So we're going to console log something out here, and this is going to be console log of the properties, and we're also going to console log out the values associated with those properties. So next, let's set up var, and just as we did before, where we need to specify a variable. So let's do property, or we could have just done X or something like that. So we do need something that's going to contain the values, the newly created values, and we use in again. So the format is exactly the same as we saw in arrays. And this time, we'll take a look at the property, and we also need to output that value of that property. So that, let's take a look, and we can see that we return back the property, so we get colors, color, make, doors, model. So we've got color, make, doors, model. So it's all there, ready to go. And the challenge is going to be to actually get the values that are associated with it. And we saw earlier, I'll give you a quick hint, and we saw earlier that if we do the bracket notation, we can use a value dynamically. So in this way, we can see that we can return back. We know that we've got the object car, and we know that we've got the property value, or the property here. So now we need to be able to retrieve back the value. So pause the video and give it a go. See if you can get the values as well as the properties output into the console. So I hope you had an opportunity to try that out for yourself, and I'm going to show you the solution. And the solution is that we use the bracket notation for objects, where we bracket around the property. So this is the same thing as if we do car model, or I need to quote around that. So we do need to quote around that model. So we see that we can retrieve back the value. So we see we get Mustang back. So let's try it out for ourselves. And now we don't have to bracket around property because this is a variable. We don't have to bracket around there or quote around there. So that's why it didn't work when we did it over here, because JavaScript was actually looking for a variable called model and not a string value called model. So let's refresh it, and we see now we've got actually the output as red, Ford, the number of doors, and Mustang. So we're able to get all of the values out. And if you want the property plus the value, you can always concatenate it together, and you can see that we've got color, red, make, Ford, doors, 5, model, Mustang. And this will work even if we add in something new, driver, and let's give the driver a name. So this car actually has a driver. It's driving the car, so we've got a driver. So it doesn't matter how many more items we add into the object, it's dynamic enough to loop through it and provide us all of those details. In the next lesson, we're going to be looking at how we can nest objects within objects, arrays within objects, arrays with objects in them, and everything in between. So that's coming up in the next lesson. Welcome back, and in this lesson we're going to be looking at how we can place objects within other objects. So we saw earlier that we can set up an object and we can create it with the curly brackets, and then we can list number of objects in there, and everything has to have a name for it. So let's say we've got a number of our friends. So let's update this to friends, and each one of our friends is a person. So we've got, let's give this one a name of Bob, and then Bob. So Bob has an age and he's 30. He's got a hair color, or we'll just call it hair, and his hair color is brown. His eyes are blue, he works, so where he works. So let's say he's a developer and so on. So this person can have some information and we can list them out. So we can do friend 1, so our first friend, and this first friend is going to be Bob. So let's see how this works out and go back out here, refresh it, and let's see what we have within friends right now. So we see that we've got our first friend, and our first friend has a whole bunch of information associated with them. So we can do this for other ones as well, and we don't actually necessarily need to do it outside. So we can do something like friend 2, so our second friend, and here we can specify additional information. So this is essentially an object within an object, and we can do the same information, we can do different information, again depending on what we want to do. So let's make this guy's hair black, and so on and so on. So now when I log out my friends, see that I've got multiple friends. Each one of these friends has its own set of properties and information contained within there. So I'm going to beautify this quickly so it's more readable. So this is another way that you can write the object information, because remember again, the way JavaScript treats the white space is that it doesn't take that into consideration, so that's where we can have all this additional white space. And essentially when you do it within this type of format, it's more readable. We see that the format is that we've got the value here, the name and the value, and then the name and the value all comma separated, and it's all held within a bracket. And we can just as easily take that object and place it within this object, or we can create a separate object directly within that object, and as long as we give it a name. Basically what this means, there's not a lot of difference, but this one is operating on its own, whereas this one is contained within here. So if we ever needed to pull these people out, if we had a bunch of friends and they all had their separate names, it might be a little bit harder to pull it out if we're doing it within this format. So always think about your structure and how you're going to actually use this data, and that's how you actually end up structuring your data. So we could just as easily, so we had friend 1, 2, and so on. So maybe my list of friends might be better suited as an array. So this time, let's set this up as an array. So we know with an array, we've got those square brackets, and the first item in our array is going to be Bob. And then the second item within our array is just going to be this unknown person. We don't have a name for them, and it's going to be sitting within that array. So let's bring this back in here. So it's all self-contained on one line. And now let's go back out and refresh it and see what we get as a result for friends 1. So we see that now we've got an array. It contains an object within each one of the items within the array, and basically we have access to all of this information. So what happens if you want to write some of this information out? And this is where the challenge is. So what I want you to do is to get the information from Bob, but using the friends object. So get where he works. So write that out into the console, and then next, using friends 1, so using friends, return back Bob's information of where he works, and then using friends 1, return back the age of the person. So pause the video and try this out. And this is a great exercise to really get used to retrieving that data that's being held within objects and arrays. So welcome back, and this challenge was to retrieve the information contained within friends. So we've got friends, next we've got the item friend 1, and we know that the information contained within here is Bob, and we want to find out where he works. So we know that he works as a developer. So it's as easy as that using the dot notation, just separating out each level of the object until we get to the item that we want to take a closer look at. And we can see that we've got all of this information contained within here as well. So we don't necessarily need, so we've got it in friends 1, and in friends we see that all we're doing is we're following the flow here. So we've got friends, we've got friend 1, and that information from Bob has been actually copied into friend 1, and all we're doing is just specifying that path to get to where he works. So the next part of the challenge was to use friends 1. So I need to spell that right. So friends 1. So this was an array, and we saw that when we output this, Bob's information is in the first item, and that other person's was in the second one. So we need to access the second one. So we need to specify that array. And then what we wanted to do was retrieve back the age. This is a combination of retrieving back that array information as well as the object information. And this is how we can get the age of that particular person. If we want to see the age of the first person, we can just change that. And Bob was actually 30 as well. We see that we can access it within that type of format. So it's great to be able to combine arrays and objects together in order to store and retrieve data. But again, it's you have to do it in a way that makes sense, and then also remember that you've got to retrieve that data in some type of format as well. So this lesson, the end of the lesson challenge is going to be to retrieve information from each one of these objects and or arrays. So we've got our friends object that contains multiple values, and we've got our friends 1 array that's got some objects in there. So what I want you to do now is to retrieve back and to update some of the information that's contained within there. So try updating the age in friends, and then also try updating both the ages in friends 1. And I'll give you a quick hint. So much like what we've seen earlier, once we can retrieve that information, so if I do friends, and if I do friend 1, and if I do age, we see that we get 40 returned back. So we know that we can access the information that way. So now it's up to you to update that information. So go ahead, pause the video, give it a go, and I'll show you the solution coming up. So I hope you had the opportunity to give that one a try, and the hint was really there that what we need to do is we need to specify the value, the new value of age. So we can do it just as easily as that, where we can make the update. So just as we can retrieve the information, we can update the information. And the same thing goes for the array. So we know that we had an array with friends 1, and let's update maybe that first item in the array, and we know that we had age. So we see that this person's age is 50, and notice the interesting thing here that's happened here is that this Bob, because we're pulling in information about Bob, and when we updated Bob's information over here, that it actually changed within the array. And that's the interesting thing about it, is that we're able to change the value of Bob. So let's try that as well. And if we do Bob's age, and let's make him 70 this time, let's take a look at friends. And we'll take a look and we'll see if that updated the age. And in fact, it did. So everything is in fact tied together. And when I take a look at friends 1, we see that it should be updated as well, because everything is tying back to that variable. And from the earlier lesson, we saw that variables can change, and they're expected to change. And that's one of the reasons that we would use a variable within these objects to make it more flexible and easier to change. So this challenge was a little bit of a trick question, because all we really had to do is go into Bob and change his age, and that would have changed everything. So also, just to finish up, let me show you how to change friends 1. So just as we're able to recall the age of friends 1, we can also take that value and we can assign a new value to it. So let's make this guy 10, and we can see that now when I list out friends 1, I can see that that change has also taken place. And lastly, let's update the value of Bob's age, and we'll set him to be 10 within friends 1. So we know that that takes place. We're able to change him to 10. Let's take a look in friends, and we'll see that his age is 10 as well within this one, within the friends. And then lastly, let's go take a look at Bob, and we see that his age is 10 as well. So they're all connected. You update one, it's going to update all of them. And that's the real beauty of using variables and really being able to create some dynamic capabilities with the connections of the variables between these different objects.
Welcome to our section on the DOM, the Document Object Model, where we're going to show you the basics to start interacting with the DOM. JavaScript is all about creating some dynamic interaction, and when it comes to web pages, this is where the DOM rules. You need to be able to access content within the DOM in order to update your HTML pages. And we're going to show you exactly that, how to interact with your HTML elements by accessing values and objects contained already built within your browser. When your browser loads up, it reads through the code and it builds a document object model, basically a tree of information that's contained within your web page. So this is all of the elements that are contained within the HTML page, even down to every little node. So where the text is located, attributes, styles, and a whole lot more. So everything is contained within the DOM, and JavaScript can connect to the DOM, pull those values out, select out elements, and make updates to it. And this is one of my favorite parts about JavaScript, having the ability to update and make your web pages really come to life. And this really illustrates the power that JavaScript has under the hood, because JavaScript can grab all of that information and make use of it through code. So that's creating dynamic content, interactive content, selecting and updating content, manipulating what's being output within the HTML, and a whole lot more. So this section is meant to introduce you to the DOM and what's available within the DOM, so that coming up in the latter part of the course, our content can be made more interesting and we can make it more interactive and show you how to interact with it with your web pages using JavaScript. And you're going to learn about all the document object model and what it can do, and how JavaScript can be used to connect to those elements. You can see what can be done with the DOM, and using the DOM you can update elements even without refreshing the web page. So those elements get dynamically updated through JavaScript, and they update immediately as what's being presented for the web user. So you're going to learn how to make that dynamic content, interact and manipulate with elements, all done dynamically via JavaScript. You can also see how all the different elements, then update them and update the inner HTML output, connect with your users and their input, and get those values right back into your JavaScript code where you can make use of them using your JavaScript. You get those values from input fields and utilize that information in JavaScript. Create visual interactions for your web visitors, select elements, and power them up just by using JavaScript. So there's a lot that we're going to be covering in the next few lessons, and this is going to be really important to creating really nice interactions with your web pages. And I do have to warn you, there is a lot of information contained within the DOM, so we're going to be touching on it lightly within this section, and in an upcoming section, we're going to dive into more detail as to what's contained within the DOM. So this section is just a simple introduction to using the DOM and starting to access those elements that are contained within your HTML page. Welcome, and in this section, we're going to be looking at how we can connect JavaScript to our HTML elements. And we're going to accomplish this by using the DOM. And what the DOM is essentially it's the document object model, and it outputs the entire contents of your HTML page as nodes within an object-like structure. And in order to see the DOM, so what I'm just doing right now is I'm selecting the document object and I'm listing out. So we saw earlier that we were using console log. We can also use console DRI to output a directory. So when I refresh it, I get this object here that's sitting within my console, and I open that up and it contains a whole lot of information. We can see we've got the URL of the website, we've got the base URI, so in this case it's the same. We've even got character sets, we've got information about cookies, and then we've also got the document type, and we've got even more information. So we've got basically all of the information that's contained within our HTML page, and it's like a map of your web page. And what this does is this allows us to connect and manipulate different parts of our web page using JavaScript. And there is a whole lot we can do with using JavaScript and picking up information from the DOM. It allows us to interact with the HTML content and make use of the content that we've got here within our HTML. So if I was to create a div and if I refresh it, then that particular div is now reflected within the DOM. And we see here that all the HTML collections, we've got our HTML tag, so starting at the top, then we've got head, next one that we encounter is title, then body, and then div, and then script. And all of that information is output here and accessible via the DOM. And this is all delivered and rendered out, built up by the browser. So what's happening here is that the browser is accessing the HTML page, it's reading through the contents of the HTML page, and then rendering out and building up this model of what's available on your page. So this is all created by the browser, and every time the page loads, it builds up all of this information, which of course is then accessible and usable by JavaScript. So what I want you to do now is to open up the console in your browser and simply type in console, and you can do this on any web page. So console DRI, and then select that document object, and then close off the parentheses, and that's how you can get information as to contain what's contained on the page. And this is again available on any web page. So open up the console, and right now I'm on the Google Chrome DevTools page. So I'll do console directory and document. So that's the statement that we need to enter in. And now you can see that I've got all of the information that's contained here. I can get the URL, I can get all of the elements. So there's quite a lot of elements on this page. So I have access, and they're all built within the DOM. I've got all of the body information. I've got all of the page information. I've even got over here, when we go down further, we can see all of the event listeners that have been set up within the page. So all of those are listed as well, and we really make use of those within JavaScript. And we can treat this entire document just as if it was any other object, and we can traverse through picking up information that's contained within here and making use of it within our JavaScript. So open that up right now within your console, try it out, and take a look at the web page that you're on and pick up some key information. And in the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to pull that out and bring that into your JavaScript. So that's coming up. Welcome back, and in this lesson, we're going to explore the DOM in more detail. And the DOM is the starting place, and it's actually the window to create interactive and dynamic content, because this is what connects your JavaScript to your HTML page. And you can also apply styling, you can create events, and a whole lot more. You can manipulate elements. So there's a lot of things that you can do within the DOM. So I hope you had an opportunity to open that up within the browser and take a quick look through it. So what we saw earlier when we were looking at our objects, we saw that we can actually get additional information. So let's say, for instance, we want to pull back last modified. We can just as easily go into our console and I can type out, so if I want to pull back when this document was last modified, we access the document object and we can specify last modified and we can return back the result. So it's as easy as that to pull that information in, and if you were trying to use that within your code, if you want to know when the document was last modified, you can really easily pull that through and output it and make use of it within your code. So say for instance you want to get the title of your document, so you could do something like document, and for title, so the title object is document title, and we can see that it actually pulls back the title information that's contained within my website. So if I change this information and if I save it, and of course I do need to go out and refresh it, and if I do document title, what that's going to do is that's going to output the title, the new title of my HTML title tag. So you can see how useful this can be, and believe me, it can do a whole lot more. So this is just the beginning, that we can pull some information that's contained within the document and output it and make use of it within our script. So what I want you to do now is open up the console and go ahead and get the doc type of your web page. And this will work on any website. So I'm going to go over to Chrome DevTools and I'm going to open it up there. So go ahead, pause the video, try it out for yourself, any web page, and try to grab that information, that title information, and pull that in and actually use it as a variable. So set up a variable in JavaScript, pull in the title information, and then store that title information in the newly created variable. So you can create that variable, call it title, and set that up. And I'll show you how to do that coming up. So I hope you had the opportunity to try this out for yourself. So we know to set up a variable title, we do var title, and now we need to equal it to the actual title of the information that's contained within the DOM. And we saw earlier that when we type in document, that actually pulls back the document object, and now we need to specify what part of the document object we want to pull in, and we want to specify and we want to grab out the title. So placing in a variable called title, and there we go, so we can pull back the title. The other challenge was to output the document type. So every web page has a document type, so we can also output that. We can even create it in a variable if we wanted to, the same way that we just did title. So in order to pull back the document type, this information again is contained within the document object, and you can actually see quite a bit of the information that's contained within here just within Chrome's DevTools. We've got a whole drop down within the console that will give us all of that information. So for document doc type, it's as simple as that. We can pull back and we can return back the document type of the specific page that we're accessing right now. And all of this information, this is built every time a page is rendered out in the browser, because it's the browser that's doing all this work and it's recreating that whole HTML content directly within the document and building out this document object. And I did say that we can also use the document object and we can interact with some of the content that's available on our web page. So I'm going to be showing you how to do that in the upcoming lesson. And in the meantime, between lessons, open up your browser, open up console, and check out all of the different pieces of information that's available within the document object. And you can also output it within this type of format as well. So you don't have to console log, you can simply type in document. And what this will do is this will return back that entire HTML code. So essentially the source code gets returned back there. And if you actually want to see it within a directory structure, then don't forget to place it within the document directory. So go ahead, try this out for yourself, take a look through, and You don't have to memorize everything that's available in the DOM, so nobody actually does, but there's some key values here that you're going to be able to make use of. You can see that there's ones like cookies and so on. So a lot of these are important. And also the big important part of it is the amount of HTML elements that are available here. And I'm going to show you how to access these elements coming up. So take a look, and next lesson, I'm going to show you how to create that interaction between the elements and your JavaScript.